choose what country they could be born in. Okay, now I have a question, just so we can see here. Mrs. Case, what country were you born in? Mrs. Case was born in Canada. And Jacory, what country were you born in? Oh, that's a state. What country is Kentucky a part of? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. That's right, okay. And Miss Brenda, what country were you born in? Zambia. Good. Anybody that was born in any other countries? Holly, were you born in another country? What country were you born in? Mongolia. She's not a Mongolian, but she was born in Mongolia. Okay? Because she couldn't choose who her parents were, right? And her parents were in Mongolia when she was born. Anybody else born in a country besides the United States of America? I don't think so. Okay, so we can't choose where we're born, but a bunch of us are born in different places. Okay, we can. So, is there anybody who controls where we're born and who our parents are? Who controls that? Lucas, you raised your hand. God does. Okay, is that what you were going to say, Jacory? Is he right? You think? How many think God controls who our parents are and where we're born? Okay, does God control anything else besides who our parents are and where we're born? Yes. He does. How do we know that? What do we know about God? Right? Remember our piece of paper here? It says, God is always in complete control of everything, everywhere. Right? So, did God want you to be here at Bible Club today? Yes. God made sure that you were here today. Okay? Some of you, this is your very first time, and you might not ever be able to come again. But God has you here so that you could hear. God has you here so that you could hear some things about the Bible today, whether it's our verse or our lesson. So, God, say it with me again, God is always in complete control of everything, everywhere. And there's a really big, fancy Bible-type word that this means. That is that God is, it starts with an S. There's two on this side, know the name of it. Anybody else remember the name of this, what this means? God is, what do you think? You remember? Is that right? Yes? God is sovereign, right? So, now so it's not just who our parents are and where we're born that God controls. He controls everything. He completely controls everything everywhere. And in our lesson today, we're going to learn about somebody who was born in the country of Persia. He lived in Persia. See, Persia's here. But his parents were from Israel, were from Palestine. But somehow God made sure he was over here. How did this man end up being over here when his parents were from here? Remember, his parents were Israelites. Now, of course, he was born over here. That means his parents were over here. How did the Israelites end up way over here, away from their homeland? How did they end up away from their homeland? Maddie? They got captured. That's right. Now, this man, even though he was a captive, God allowed him to have a very important job. His job was he was called the king's cupbearer. And one of the things that meant is that he made sure that all the food that the king was going to eat was safe. But he did a lot of other things beside that. He did all kinds of work for the king. The king would say, Nehemiah, I want this to be done. And Nehemiah would go out and make sure it was done. He would come back and say, all right, king, we've got that all taken care of. And he'd say, well, I've been thinking about this other thing, and I want to make sure that this is done. And so Nehemiah would go out and do other things. And so Nehemiah was a very important person, a very helpful person to the king of Persia. The king of Persia. I'm being confused now. Because I was reading this morning about Esther's king. That was Ahasuerus. So this is Artaxerxes. They got these weird names. It's easy to mess up. So Artaxerxes had an assistant, and they called him a cupbearer. Somebody that was like just did lots of important jobs for him, and his name was Nehemiah. But Nehemiah was not a Persian. Nehemiah was not a Persian. How did Nehemiah get this very important job for the king? Somebody made sure Nehemiah had this very important job, didn't he? Who was that? God. God made sure that Nehemiah was in this particular place. Nehemiah had a brother. And Nehemiah's brother lived in Israel. For the last 10 or so years he lived in Israel when our story starts. He, of course, was from Persia before that, but he went back to Israel with Ezra. How many remember the name of Ezra? Remember Ezra last week? He took people back with him, and when Ezra went back to Israel, Nehemiah's brother Hanani went with him. Nehemiah was still in the land. He was there doing his important job. God had him there doing his important job. But Nehemiah thought about his brother, and he thought about all of his other friends and his countrymen that were back in Jerusalem. And what were they doing back there in Jerusalem? What were all the people that went back to Jerusalem? What were they doing? What did they want to do? Tell me one thing. They built the temple. That's right. They needed to build the temple. You remember some other things they did? They rebuilt their homes. That's right. And so Nehemiah was thinking about his other countrymen and his brother back there in Jerusalem. And one day he had a visitor. His brother came back to visit him, and he said, Hananiah, how are things doing back in Jerusalem? Is everything going well? Is Ezra teaching the people? I can imagine he might have just asked a million questions. I mean, you know how it is when you haven't seen anybody for a long time. Lots and lots of questions. And he said, is the wall of Jerusalem built up? Because we would think that everything would be building. And Hananiah said, well, the city is still ruined. The walls are still broken down. The gates are still burnt. They're burnt up from when they were burned with fire. And the people are discouraged. And Nehemiah got sad. He thought, oh my. In fact, he wept and cried. He was a grown man, and that doesn't happen very often. Most of the time, grown men, they have learned how to keep their tears inside, haven't they? Well, Nehemiah, he cried, but he knew why these things had happened. Why was Jerusalem still having all these troubles? Why were the people having all these struggles? Corey, what do you think? They were sinning. They had sinned. They had worshipped idols for a long time, hadn't they? They had broken the commandments of God, and their hearts were evil and wicked, and they didn't love God. And Nehemiah cried out to God and says, I know we have sinned. Our fathers have sinned against you and broken his commandments, and our hearts are... But you have promised that if we turn back to you, right, that you will build the walls of Jerusalem for us again. Because he understood what Ezra understood, that the hand of God is upon them for good if they seek him. And he sought God. And so time went by, and he prayed and prayed and continued to pray to God. And thought, the people in Jerusalem, they need somebody to help them build their walls. If you are a big city, in those days, they didn't know such thing as airplanes or anything like that. So if an army came against you and they had chariots and horses, and you were in a city, what would you want to have around your city to protect you from that army? A wall, right? Big, thick walls. If we have a big, thick wall, then, even like in here, if there were some mean people outside, and we were inside, we'd be safe from them, wouldn't we? Pretty much. I mean, unless they had something really big. But if they just had baseball bats, and they wanted to get us, we could lock the door, and they could beat on the walls all they wanted, right? But we'd be safe inside the walls. Well, the city of Jerusalem was not safe. Lots of people lived there, but they were not safe. Their walls were broken down, their gates were burnt up. And Nehemiah prayed, and as he was praying, he realized that somebody needed to go there and help the people, to encourage them, to get them to be able to build their walls back again, and to be protected, and to rebuild the gates. And finally, as he was praying, he thought, I think maybe God wants me to do that. Well, he tried to do his very best to be a good cupbearer. Remember, he was a cupbearer. Who was he the cupbearer for? The king. So he was the cupbearer for the king. He didn't want to get the king upset or anything. But one day, finally, as he was serving the king said, Nehemiah, you're upset. Why is your countenance all sad? Nehemiah thought, uh-oh, because he didn't want to be sad in front of the king. And so very quickly he prayed. In fact, he prayed super, super quick. Because between the king asking him and him answering, the Bible says he prayed. So I prayed to the God of heaven. And then he talked back to the king. He said, King Artaxerxes, I'm sad. Why? Of course I'm sad. I'm sad because my people back in Jerusalem, they're all discouraged, and they're hardly doing what they should, and their walls are broke down, and the gates are burned with fire. And the king said to Nehemiah, what do you want to do? Well, what did Nehemiah want to do? He wanted to go back there, didn't he? Who made it so the king offered Nehemiah to go back there and just asked him, well, what do you want to do? God did that, didn't he? And so Nehemiah said, well, I would like to go back and build the temple is built. I want to go back and build the walls and rebuild the city so that our people can be protected. So the king said, well, what are you going to need to do that? How long are you going to be gone? All of a sudden, he already said you could go, and he just wanted to know how long. And Nehemiah said, okay, I'm going to need, he told him, and he said, I'm going to need wood. Well, if you're going to build gates and walls, you need wood, he said. So the king said, I'll write a letter to the person that's in charge of all the wood, and you can get wood, and money, and protection, and all of these things. So the king wrote letters, and the king sent protection along with him. Do you remember when Ezra went back? Did Ezra have any protection when he went back?
No.
He did. Well, who protected Ezra? God did. He didn't have soldiers with him. So, but God used the king's soldiers to protect Nehemiah, didn't he? So, does God do everything the same way all the time? No. Sometimes he protects by himself. Sometimes he uses soldiers to protect us. God can do whatever he wants, can't he? And he can do things however he wants because he's always in complete control of everything, everywhere. And so, the king gave Nehemiah everything he needed, wrote letters so that he would have everything he needed, and Nehemiah then went back with those soldiers to protect him all the way back to Jerusalem. This long way, all the way from Persia, all the way back to Jerusalem. Now when he got there, he looked and he saw the city of Jerusalem and he thought, oh my, this is really broken down. See there? See, there's a gate, but you could just walk right through that gate. And this is a wall. That doesn't look like a very good wall, does it? You could kind of just walk right through that wall, couldn't you? So the people are there, they didn't have a very good wall, and Nehemiah started looking around. He was there for a couple of days, and then he went out with his donkey, and he tried to walk all the way around the city walls. But there was, in certain places, there was so much rubbish, so many stones and from the old wall that were pushed out that he couldn't even get around. It was way worse than he even thought. It was going to be very super hard to be able to rebuild these walls, and he saw the terrible condition the walls were in. And so then the next morning he got the leaders of the people, the ones in charge, and he said to you, I haven't told anybody why I'm coming, But I'm here because the king has sent me and has given me the authority to lead all of us in rebuilding the walls of our city. Look at how terrible things are. We need to rebuild our walls. And so the people said, that's true, we do need to rebuild our walls, and we will help. But the walls are really broken down bad. And actually this week we're going to have to wait until next to see if they're able to build their walls. All of them wanted to have walls built up, but you think it would be hard? You think it's just easy to rebuild the walls? No, because if it was, it would have been done already, wouldn't it? Next week we're going to see all the different opposition. There was all different types of people. What do you think? Do you think, well, sometimes it would be hard work. How many of you like working really hard? When the work gets really hard, you just say, oh, make it even harder. We don't like that, do we? When we have hard work, we kind of like to stop and take a break, don't we? Well, this is hard work, and some of the people probably, they were like, I don't know if I want to work that hard. And then there was other people around, they didn't like it that those walls were being built up. We're going to hear all about that next week. But we know something, don't we? We know something that regardless, doesn't matter what happens to these people, somebody